The boy's feet scraped against the dirt as the rope bit into his neck. He stumbled once, twice, catching himself before his knees hit the ground. Dust clung to the hollows of his cheeks, and his eyes were the color of river silt, flat, unreadable. The ranch hands dragged him into the yard, boots heavy on the dry earth. Laughter followed, sharp and careless, cutting at the air like a whip. The sheriff leaned against a fence post, chewing slowly, eyes half-lidded. His badge caught the light, a small flicker in the shade. He didn't move when the boy was hauled in front of him. "What's this?" he asked, voice thick. "Thief," one of the ranch hands said. "Took bread from the kitchen. Didn't ask. Didn't pay." The sheriff glanced at the boy, then back to the hand. "Bread's worth a rope now?" The landowner stepped forward, a tall man in a clean coat, silver buckle at his waist. His voice was smooth, but it landed hard. "Not worth a rope, worth a lesson." His gaze stayed on the boy. "This one's too wild to keep." The boy didn't blink. "Wild how?" the sheriff asked. "Eyes always watching, mouth always shut," the landowner said. "Won't follow orders. Spooks the animals." The boy's wrists twitched like he might lift them, but the rope tightened at his throat. He coughed once, swallowing it down. A shape moved at the edge of the yard, a man in worn leather, hat pulled low, quiet as shadow. The ranch hands didn't notice him until he stepped closer. His boots left no rush of dust, only a muted thud with each step. He stopped 5 feet from the boy. The sheriff nodded toward him. "Scout." The man's eyes stayed on the boy. "What did he take?" "Bread," the landowner said again. Like the word explained everything. The scout tilted his head. "You gonna hang him for bread?" The landowner's jaw tightened. "He's not worth the trouble of keeping alive." The boy's breathing was shallow, chest rising quick. His gaze flicked from the scout's boots to the set of his shoulders. "I'll take him," the scout said. The yard went still. One of the ranch hands spat into the dirt. "You want this one? You'll regret it." The scout didn't look away from the boy. "I'll take him," he repeated. The landowner studied the scout for a moment, weighing something. "He's yours. But he doesn't come back here. Not for work. Not for begging." The scout nodded once. "Fine." The rope came off with a jerk. The boy swayed, rubbing at the raw skin on his neck. No one moved to help him. "You walk," the scout said. The boy hesitated, glancing toward the ranch house. The kitchen door was open, a shadow moving inside. He turned back to the scout and followed. They crossed the yard, passing the sheriff, who said nothing. The boy could feel the ranch hands watching his back. He didn't look over his shoulder. Beyond the fence, the land stretched wide and empty. The scout didn't speak for a long time. The boy matched his pace, even when the ground cut at his bare feet. "Name?" the scout asked finally. The boy shook his head. "You got one?" Another shake. "All right," the scout said. They walked until the ranch was a line behind them. The sun dropped lower, pulling long shadows over the ground. The scout's horse waited under a dead tree, reins tied loose. The scout untied them, then looked at the boy. "You ride?" The boy's eyes narrowed. "Thought so." The scout swung into the saddle. "Keep up." The horse moved at a steady pace. The boy jogged alongside, silent, breathing through his nose. His hands stayed at his sides, never reaching for the horse, never slowing. An hour passed. The air cooled. The scout glanced down at the boy. "You run from something?" The boy kept moving. "Or to something?" No answer. "Either way," the scout said, "you're mine now." They reached a ridge where the land dipped into a shallow valley. A small shed sat in the middle, its roof sagging, the door hanging crooked. The scout dismounted, pushed the door open, and stepped inside. The boy followed. In the dim light, against the far wall, a saddle sat on a wooden stand. The leather was worn smooth, the silver conchos dull but clean. The boy stopped. The scout watched him. "Earn it." The boy's fingers twitched. "Not yet," the scout said. "First you work, then you ride." The boy nodded once, slow. His stomach growled. The scout walked past him, pulled a canteen from a hook, and handed it over. "Drink. Tomorrow we start before the sun." The boy drank, water running down his chin. He didn't thank the scout. Outside, the sky deepened to a bruised purple. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. The boy sat on the floor near the saddle, not touching it, but close enough to feel it was real. The scout leaned against the doorway, eyes scanning the dark. "Get some sleep." The boy didn't lie down. The scout didn't tell him twice. They left before the first rim of sun broke the edge of the hills. The scout walked ahead, steady, not once looking back to see if the boy followed. The boy kept his eyes on the man's shoulders, on the slow swing of his arms. They didn't speak. Dust rose around their boots and settled again. The silence wasn't heavy. It was the kind that left a man alone with his own thoughts. The boy's thoughts weren't much, just the burn in his legs, the rasp of his throat, and the steady knot of hunger that had been there for days. When they passed the creek, the scout stopped, filled the canteen, and took a long drink. He held it out. The boy drank until the water ran down his chin. The scout took it back without a word. The land opened ahead, nothing but low grass and scattered fence posts, leaning like old men. The shed came into view as a dark square in the distance, leaning slightly to one side. The closer they got, the more the boy saw. Slats of wood dried pale, a tin roof pitted with rust, a door hanging on one hinge. The scout pushed the door open and stepped inside. The boy followed. The smell was faint, dry leather, old hay, the ghost of oil rubbed into wood. Sunlight slanted through a gap in the wall, falling across a single object, a saddle on a wooden stand. The leather was dark and polished, the silver conchos dull but clean. It looked cared for, yet untouched for years. The boy stopped in the doorway, eyes fixed on it. "Go on," the scout said. The boy stepped closer, circling it like it might spook. His fingers hovered just above the leather, not daring to touch. "Yours?" he asked quietly. The scout shook his head. "Was." The boy frowned. "Whose now?" The scout's eyes didn't leave the saddle. "No one's, until it's earned." The boy looked at him. "Earn it how?" "You'll know when it's time." The boy let his hand fall to his side. "Could ride with it now." The scout's voice stayed flat. "Could fall with it now." They stood in the dust and quiet for a long moment. Then the scout moved to a low table in the corner, pulling out a tin of jerky and a hard heel of bread. He tossed the bread to the boy. The boy bit into it, chewing slowly. The bread was stale, but it was bread. "You sleep here tonight," the scout said. The boy swallowed. "With it." "With it." The scout left him there, going back outside to tend to the horse. The boy heard the soft thud of hooves, the creak of leather. He stayed inside, eyes drifting back to the saddle every few seconds, as if it might disappear if he looked away too long. When the scout returned, he laid his bedroll in the corner opposite the boy. "Sun comes up, you work. No talk, no questions." The boy nodded, still chewing the last of the bread. Night fell slow, the light shifting from gold to gray, the air cooling. The scout sat in the doorway, watching the dark roll in over the hills. The boy stayed near the saddle, close enough to smell the leather. "You think I'll take it back?" the scout said. The boy didn't answer. "You sleep better when it's close," the scout said. The boy met his eyes. "I sleep better when I can see it." The scout didn't smile, but something in his face softened. "Then keep it close." They lay down, the sound of wind through the slats filling the quiet. Somewhere in the night, a coyote yipped, answered by another. The boy's eyes stayed open, fixed on the shadowed shape of the saddle. He thought about riding it, what it would feel like to fit his weight into the seat, to grip the worn leather, to move with the horse instead of beside it. He thought about the rope on his neck that morning, and how the saddle felt like the opposite of that. The scout's breathing was slow and even. The boy wondered if the man slept as light as he looked. He reached out once, fingers brushing the edge of the stirrup. The leather was cool, smooth under his touch. He pulled his hand back quickly, like the contact had been too much. Outside, the wind shifted, bringing the faint smell of smoke from somewhere far off. The boy lifted his head, listening. The scout stirred but didn't open his eyes. The boy lay back down, saddle still in sight. He closed his eyes only when he felt sure it was still there. He slept light, waking every so often to check the shape in the dark. Each time it was still there, waiting. The boy woke to the smell of bread, not the faint, dry smell of stale crusts, but warm bread, fresh enough that the air in the shed carried it like a promise. He pushed himself up from the floor, eyes going straight to the table against the wall. A round loaf sat there, steam rising faintly from its split top. He didn't ask where it came from. He crossed the space in 3 steps, sat down, and tore a piece away. His teeth sank into the soft center. He didn't taste it so much as feel it fill the hollow in his stomach. Another piece followed, then another, his hands moving quick, careless. Blood dotted the pale crust, faint at first, then more as the loaf grew smaller. He glanced down. The skin over his knuckles was raw and split. Dirt and grit pressed into the cuts from the day before. He kept eating. The scout stepped in from outside, shutting the door with a low thud. He took one look at the boy's hands and crossed the room. Without a word, he set a tin basin on the table and poured water from the canteen. The water ran cloudy as the boy's hands went in. The boy winced when the scout rubbed a cloth over the cuts. "You could have asked," he muttered. The scout didn't stop. "You'd have said no." The boy shrugged. "Doesn't mean you can just do it?" "Doesn't mean I can't," the scout said. The cloth turned pink, the water darker. The boy pulled his hands free and reached for the bread again. The scout let him. They ate in silence, the only sounds the crust breaking under their fingers and the faint whistle of wind through the shed's boards. Hoofbeats broke the quiet, slow, deliberate. The scout's head turned toward the sound, his eyes narrowing. The boy froze mid-bite. "Who is it?" The scout didn't answer. He moved to the doorway, staying just inside the shadow. Through the gap in the boards, the boy saw 3 riders coming along the narrow track that passed the shed. They weren't hurrying. Their horses walked at an easy pace, heads low, as if the men had all the time in the world. The first rider glanced toward the shed. His eyes lingered a moment too long before he looked ahead again. The others didn't look at all, but the boy could feel it, the way you feel a cold draft on the back of your neck. The hoofbeats faded, swallowed by the wind. The boy kept his gaze on the door. "Are they coming back?" The scout stepped away from the opening, pulled the door shut, and went back to the table. "Well?" the boy pressed. The scout sat, tore a small piece from the loaf, and chewed it slowly. "They looked like they were," the boy said. The scout didn't meet his eyes. "You're not going to answer." The scout kept eating. The boy leaned forward, elbows on the table. "If they are, I'd like to know before they show up." The scout set the bread down. "Eat, then clean the shed." "That's not an answer," the boy said. "It's the one you're getting." The boy sat back, jaw tight. "You could have just said yes or no." "Wouldn't change what happens," the scout said. The boy looked toward the door again. The track outside was empty now, just 2 lines cut into the dirt. He finished the bread in slow bites, chewing longer than needed. His hands throbbed where the cuts had reopened. He thought about the riders. The way the first one had looked at the shed, like he was marking it in his mind. The scout stood, gathering the empty basin and cloth. "You'll haul water after," he said. The boy nodded, still watching the door. "You gonna be here?" "I'll be close." The boy didn't ask where close meant. He had a feeling the scout's definition was different from his. The rest of the day passed with the sound of wind and the scrape of the broom on the shed's floor. Dust lifted, settled again. The boy worked until the air outside dimmed to the color of old tin. When he finally stepped outside, the track was untouched. No new hoofprints. The riders hadn't come back. Not yet. Inside, the scout was oiling the saddle. The leather caught the last light, gleaming dark and sure. The boy stood in the doorway, breathing in the smell of oil and bread still lingering in the air. He thought about the rope, the loaf, the riders, and the way the scout had said nothing at all. The boy woke up with his throat tight and eyes stinging. It wasn't the dust. It was sharper, heavier, smoke. He sat up fast, scanning the dim shape of the shed. The scout was already on his feet, pulling boots on, his movements quick and quiet. "What is it?" the boy asked. The scout didn't answer, just pushed the door open. Cold air rushed in, carrying the smell stronger now. The boy followed him out. The trough in the yard burned like a shallow coffin. Flames licked the edges where the boards were dry. The water was gone, steam curling from blackened wood. Hoofprints cut circles around it, deep and deliberate. The scout's jaw flexed. "Pack!" The boy glanced back toward the shed. "Where?" "Now," the scout said. The boy's feet stayed planted. "I'm not leaving without it." The scout turned, eyes narrowing. "What?" "The saddle," the boy said. The scout stepped closer. "We don't have time for—" "I'm not leaving without it," the boy repeated, voice low but steady. The fire popped behind them, sending a curl of sparks into the air. The scout stared at him for a long second, then gave a short nod. 2 minutes. The boy ran inside. The saddle sat where it always had, dark and solid against the wall. He lifted it, surprised at its weight. and hauled it to the door. The scout took it from him, slinging it over his shoulder as if it were nothing. They moved fast to the horse. The scout threw the saddle on, tightened the cinch, and swung up. "Mount," he said. The boy climbed up behind him, arms tight around the scout's waist. The horse shifted under them, restless. From the ridge beyond the yard, a shape moved, then another, shadows against the faint gray of early morning. The scout's heels dug in. The horse shot forward, hooves striking hard against the ground. The wind cut at the boy's face, the smell of smoke trailing them. "Are they following?" the boy asked. "Eyes front," the scout said. The land rolled beneath them, flat giving way to low hills. The boy risked a glance back. A dark line moved along the ridge, 3 riders at least, maybe more. The scout veered toward a narrow cut in the hills. The ground dropped into a dry wash, the horse's hooves sending up grit. They followed the wash until it bent sharp toward a canyon mouth. The boy looked up at the walls, high and close, blocking the wind. "Why here?" "Buys time," the scout said. The horse's breathing was loud now, matching the boy's. The saddle creaked under them. "They set the fire," the boy said. "Meant for us to see it," the scout replied. "Why?" The scout's voice was flat. "Fear's a good leash." The canyon narrowed, the walls rising higher, cutting the light. The sound of their hooves echoed, bouncing back in uneven bursts. The boy gripped the saddle horn, the leather warm under his hands. "Think they'll follow us in?" he asked. The scout didn't answer. The boy leaned to look past him, but the bend ahead hid everything beyond. Behind them, the echo of hooves faded. "They stopped," the boy said. The scout slowed the horse to a walk. Number just hanging back. The boy felt a chill crawl up his neck. Waiting for what? The scout's eyes scanned the rock walls. "For us to come out the other side." They rode in silence for a stretch. The air in the canyon was cooler, but still held the faint bite of smoke. The boy thought about the burning trough, the way the hoofprints had circled like they were marking territory. "They could have burned the shed," he said finally. "They could have," the scout agreed. "Why didn't they?" The scout's voice was low. "Because they want you to keep running." The boy's grip tightened. "So they can catch me tired." The scout didn't correct him. The canyon widened a little, enough for the horse to pick up speed again. The shadows along the walls shifted with the morning light. The boy kept looking over his shoulder, half expecting the riders to appear from the bend. "Have you ever been caught?" he asked. The scout's eyes stayed forward. "Once." "What happened?" "I left." The boy waited for more, but nothing came. They rode until the canyon began to open, the light stronger now. The scout pulled the horse to a stop in the shadow of a tall rock face. He swung down and held out a hand. "Off!" The boy slid to the ground, legs unsteady. The scout loosened the cinch, letting the horse breathe. "We will stay here for a while. Let them wonder where we went." The boy glanced toward the canyon mouth. "What if they find us?" The scout checked the saddle straps. "Then we ride again." The boy touched the saddle, the leather warm from their flight. Smoke still clung faint to his clothes. He thought about the fire, the circle of hoofprints, the shadows on the ridge. He didn't ask the question he wanted to ask. The scout led the horse to a patch of grass near the rock wall. The boy stayed where he was, watching the canyon behind them, waiting for the first shadow to break the light. They came to the river just after midday, the air heavy and still. It wasn't deep, but it stretched wide, its surface moving in slow, deceptive patterns. The boy stopped at the edge, boots sinking slightly into the damp bank. The scout dismounted, leading the horse closer to the water. "Not every crossing's the same," he said. The boy squinted at the far shore. "Looks shallow all the way." "That's what gets men killed," the scout replied. He pointed to a section where the water swirled in a lazy half circle. "Soft bottom there. The horse'll sink." The boy stepped forward, scanning the current. "So where?" The scout walked along the bank, eyes on the water. "Watch the grass under the surface. See how it leans." The boy looked, but the glare off the water caught his eyes. "I don't see it." "You're looking at the shine. Look at the shadow," the scout said. The boy crouched, trying again. He saw it then, blades of river grass bending one way, then another, like 2 different winds meeting. "That's the split," the scout said. "We cross above it." The boy nodded. "I can do that." "Show me," the scout said. The boy walked upstream, stopped where he thought it was right, and pointed. The scout shook his head. "Too far. I'll take the horse sideways." The boy tried again. this time picking a spot closer to where the water ran smooth but quick. The scout's expression didn't change. "Close," he said. "But being close isn't safe." Frustration tightened the boy's jaw. "You pick it then." The scout led the horse to a point just above a cluster of reeds. "Here." They waded in, water climbing to the boy's knees in seconds. The current pressed hard, stronger than it looked. The boy stumbled once, caught himself on the saddle's edge. The scout kept the horse steady, moving slow but sure. Halfway across, the bottom shifted under the boy's boots, soft mud trying to pull him down. His grip on the saddle tightened. The scout glanced back. "Upstream, lean into it." The boy did, muscles burning until the ground firmed again. When they stepped onto the far bank, water dripped from their clothes in dark patches. The horse shook itself, sending a spray across both of them. The boy looked back at the river, the current moving on as if they'd never been there. That was harder than it looked. "Most things worth doing are," the scout said. They led the horse up the bank, into a stand of low trees. The air changed, warmer, carrying the faint, bitter tang of smoke. The scout slowed, eyes scanning ahead. The boy smelled it too now, stronger with each step. They found the camp just beyond the trees, or what was left of it. A blackened ring of stones held the last crumbling embers of a fire. Ash spread in a thin layer across the ground, still holding a faint trace of heat. The boy crouched, picking up a small charred stick. This was last night. The scout knelt by the ashes, running his fingers through them. A faint curl of smoke rose where he touched. Earlier, the boy frowned. "So they're ahead of us." "They're close," the scout said. The boy's gaze swept the trees. "How close?" The scout didn't answer right away. He stood, scanning the ground until his eyes caught on a line of hoofprints heading north. "Close enough you'll hear them before you see them." The boy's throat tightened. "You think it's the same ones?" "Same or worse," the scout said. The boy looked back toward the river. "We could go back." The scout shook his head. "They'd be waiting." A gust of wind lifted some of the ash, scattering it like gray snow. The boy watched it settle, thinking of the burning trough, the riders on the ridge, the firelight in the scout's eyes that night. The scout walked to the horse, tightening the cinch. "We keep moving." The boy hesitated, then followed. The smell of the camp clung to his clothes as they rode on, and every snap of a branch in the woods made him glance over his shoulder. They rode until the sun slid low, the light turning the land the color of brass. The boy's shoulders ached from holding the saddle horn, but he kept his grip tight. The air smelled dry, sharp, carrying no trace of the river they'd left behind. It was near dusk when the boy saw it. A tree stood just off the trail, tall and split down one side from some old lightning strike. Burned deep into its unscarred half was a mark, 2 lines crossed by a third, curved at the ends like hooks. The edges of the brand were black and glassy, as if the heat that made it had been more than fire. The boy pulled the horse to a stop. "What's that?" The scout turned in the saddle, followed the boy's gaze, and his jaw tightened. "Keep moving." The boy didn't. "I've never seen that before." "Good," the scout said. The boy frowned. "What is it?" The scout sighed, guiding the horse closer. "Old family's mark, old enough that most folks don't remember it." "Then why's it here?" The scout's eyes stayed on the brand. "Because some debts don't get buried. They just wait." The boy leaned forward. "Debts for what?" The scout glanced at him. "Doesn't matter." "It matters if they're chasing us for it," the boy said. "They're not chasing you," the scout replied. The boy felt the words land like a stone in his chest. "So it's you they want." The scout looked away. "I carry something they think is theirs." "What?" The scout's voice went flat. "Not yours to know." The boy's grip on the saddle horn tightened. "If it's going to get me killed, it's mine to know." The scout's gaze flicked to him, steady but unreadable. "If it was yours to know, I'd tell you. Now ride." The boy's mouth stayed shut after that, but his mind didn't. They rode past the tree, the marks still burning in his thoughts. He kept glancing back until it disappeared behind the bend. By the time they stopped for the night, the light had gone, replaced by a deep, restless dark. They made camp in a shallow dip between 2 low ridges. The scout built a small fire no bigger than his hands and kept it shielded with stones. The boy sat across from him, the saddle resting beside him on the ground. The air was cool, and the silence stretched until it felt too tight to hold. "You said they're not after me," the boy said finally. The scout didn't look up from the fire. I did. So why take me from the yard? The scout's voice was quiet, because they would have taken you anyway, and worse. The boy stared at him, waiting, but no more words came. The flames cast shifting light over the scout's face, drawing shadows deep under his eyes. The boy noticed how he kept glancing at the edges of camp, as if expecting something to move there. "They gonna follow all night?" the boy asked. The scout poked the fire with a stick. "Not tonight. They've marked the land. That's enough for now." The boy lay back on his bedroll, pulling his coat over him. The saddle was close enough that his fingers could touch it if he reached out. The fire burned low, the wood popping softly. The boy's eyes grew heavy, but the mark on the tree kept coming back to him, black, sharp, deliberate. When sleep took him, it was quick and deep. In the dream, the mark burned in the grass, flames running in long lines until the field glowed red. The fire moved like it was being pulled by something under the ground, tracing paths that made no sense until they closed into that same hooked shape. The heat pressed against his skin, but he couldn't move. Somewhere beyond the fire, horses waited. He could hear them breathing, slow and steady, but he couldn't see them. The ground shook under their weight. He woke before dawn, heart racing. The fire in camp was just glowing coals now, and the scout was already up, saddling the horse. "Time to ride," the scout said. The boy got to his feet, glancing toward the ridges. The land looked still, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the mark was out there somewhere, burned into more than just trees. Morning came quiet, except for the wind. It slipped low over the ridge, carrying something dry and bitter. The boy sat up, rubbed his head, and felt grit between his fingers. Ash, fine and gray, clinging to his hair and clothes like it had been falling all night. He shook it off, but more came with the next gust. The scout was already moving, rolling his bedroll tight and strapping it to the saddle. He didn't say anything. The boy brushed at his coat. "Where's it coming from?" The scout didn't answer. He swung into the saddle, eyes fixed ahead. "Mount up." They rode with the wind at their backs. It carried the smell stronger now, burned wood, cooked earth, and something faint beneath it that the boy didn't want to name. By midday, he saw it. The ground ahead turned black, patches of smoke still curling from the edges. Beyond that, a scatter of low buildings, their shapes softened by haze. The boy slowed the horse. "What is it?" "Settlement," the scout said. "What happened?" The scout looked at him once, then forward again. "Wait here." The boy's grip on the reins tightened. "Why?" "Because you don't need to see it." "I've seen worse." The scout's voice was flat. "Number you haven't." He dismounted, handed the reins to the boy, and started toward the smoldering buildings. His boots left prints in the ash, each step sinking slightly. The boy watched him disappear into the haze. The horse shifted under him, uneasy. He kept his eyes on the place where the scout had gone, waiting for movement. Minutes dragged. The wind pushed more ash into his hair, onto his shoulders. Somewhere in the distance, a beam gave way with a sharp crack. He thought about following, but the scout's words kept him in place. So he waited. When the scout came back, the air around him seemed heavier. His hands were black with soot, streaking up his wrists. He brushed at them absently, but it didn't come off. The boy leaned forward in the saddle. "What did you see?" The scout didn't answer. "Was it them?" The boy pressed. The scout took the reins from his hands, mounted, and turned the horse without looking at him. "We ride." The boy frowned. "You're not going to tell me?" "Not now." The boy stared at him. "So, never?" The scout's eyes stayed on the trail. "Keep your questions for things you can change." They rode on, the burned settlement falling behind them. The wind kept whispering through the grass, scattering ash until it mixed with the dust from their horses' hooves. The boy glanced at the scout's hands again. The soot had smeared onto the reins into the lines of his fingers. "You could wash it off in the river," the boy said. The scout didn't respond. "It's gonna stay there otherwise." The scout finally looked at him. "Good." The boy shifted in the saddle, unsure if it was an answer or a warning. They traveled until the sun slid low, the air cooling. The smell of smoke faded, replaced by the clean scent of dry earth. Still, the boy caught himself running his hand through his hair, trying to shake out the last of the ash. When they stopped for the night, the scout built no fire. They ate cold jerky in the half-light. The boy sat across from him, the saddle between them. "If it was them, we should know." The scout's gaze was steady. "Knowing won't change what we do next." "Then what do we do next?" We keep moving until they can't. The boy thought about that. About the riders they hadn't seen since the canyon, but could feel close anyway. He lay down with the saddle under his arm, the smell of leather mixing with the faint trace of smoke in his coat. Sleep came slow. When it did, it carried the sound of wind pushing through burned rafters, and the sight of the scouts' blackened hands against the pale morning light. They turned off the main track just after midday, following a narrow trail that curved between low hills. The grass grew taller here, brittle and pale, bending under the wind. The scout didn't say where they were going, but the way he rode, straight-backed, eyes forward, told the boy he knew the place. When the ranch came into view, it was nothing like the boy expected. The house sat low against the slope, the wood grayed from years of sun. Every window was covered with nailed boards. The front door hung half open, creaking faintly when the wind caught it. They rode into the yard. The ground was dry, cracked in places, dust lifting with each step. A stone well stood near the house, the bucket gone, the rope frayed and dangling over the side. The scout dismounted, walked to the well, and leaned over. The boy slid down from the saddle, curiosity pulling him closer. "Is there water?" The scout's voice was flat. "No." The boy peered in. Only darkness met his eyes, no glint of water, no smell of damp earth. Just emptiness. "What happened to it?" he asked. The scout straightened, brushing dust from his hands. "Dried up. Or was drained." The boy frowned. "Who'd drain a well?" The scout didn't answer. He walked toward the house, boots crunching over the yard. The boy followed. The open door swung again, groaning on rusted hinges. Inside, the air smelled stale, thick with the scent of old wood and something faintly metallic. The rooms were bare. No chairs, no table, just pale marks on the floor where furniture had once stood. The walls held shadows where pictures might have hung. In the corner of what could have been a bedroom, the boy saw it. A small boot, scuffed and worn, tipped on its side in the dust. He picked it up. The leather was stiff, the sole cracked. It looked like it had been there a long time. He carried it out into the light. Was it like this before? The scout stood by the well again, staring at the dry stones. Was it? The boy asked again. The scout turned, eyes steady but tired. "Number they took everything." The boy looked at the boot in his hand. "Even this." "They don't take what they can't sell," the scout said, "or what they want left as a reminder." The boy set the boot on the edge of the well, its small shape stark against the pale stone. "Why here?" The scout glanced at the boarded windows. "It was mine once." The boy's eyes widened. "Yours?" "For a time," the scout said. The boy tried to imagine it. This place full, alive, with people drawing water, animals in the yard, windows open to the air. It didn't fit with what stood here now. "What happened?" the boy asked. The scout looked past him toward the hills. "Same thing that happens when you owe the wrong people too much." The boy thought of the mark on the tree, the burned settlement, the shadow of riders on a ridge. And now they want it back. The scout's jaw tightened. They want more than that. The wind pushed through the yard, lifting dust into thin spirals. The boy glanced at the boot again. It seemed wrong to leave it there, but wrong to take it too. He left it where it was. They walked back to the horse. The scout tightened the cinch and checked the straps without speaking. The boy mounted first, the saddle creaking under his weight. As they rode away, the boy kept looking over his shoulder until the house disappeared behind the rise. He thought about the dry well, the boarded windows, the echoing rooms. He thought about the scout's words. They took everything, and understood, in a way he hadn't before, that surviving out here wasn't about keeping what you had. It was about keeping them from taking the last thing you couldn't live without. The barn sat at the far edge of the pasture, its roof sagging in the middle, one side pulled down by years of storms. The boards were silvered and split, gaps wide enough to let the wind whistle straight through. The scout pushed the door open, its bottom edge dragging in the dirt, and the smell inside was old hay, rust, and the faint tang of leather that had soaked in over years. The boy stepped in after him, eyes adjusting to the dim. Light slipped through the cracks in narrow, dusty beams, falling across piles of rusted tools, a wagon wheel propped in the corner, and rows of hooks nailed to the wall. Some still held tack, reined stiff with age, a bridle with a broken bit, but most hung empty like they had been cleared in a hurry. Near the back, Half buried in dust, the boy saw them, strips of leather, each no wider than his hand, piled like someone had cut apart dozens of belts and tossed them aside. He crouched, brushing dirt from the top strip. Faint, careful lines appeared, letters carved deep into the hide, still visible after years. He read the first one aloud, voice low. L. Parson. The scout's shadow fell over him. Don't say them. The boy looked up. Why not? They're not for calling, the scout said. The boy glanced back at the pile. What are they then? The scout crouched beside him, picked up one of the strips, and turned it over in his hand. The carving on this one was deeper, the letters cleaner, as if someone had worked slowly, maybe by lamplight, to make them last. Names, the scout said. I can see that, the boy said. But whose? The scout's gaze stayed on the leather. People who vanished, taken, traded, buried where no one will find them. The boy's throat tightened. And someone made these. Someone kept track, the scout said. The boy looked down at the pile. There were more than he could count at a glance. Some cracked, some curled with age, some stained darker in places he didn't want to think about. Why here? Barns keep things dry, the scout said. Even secrets. The boy hesitated, then picked up another strip. The name was almost worn away, the leather soft where the letters had been pressed. Do you know them all? Not all, the scout said. Enough. The boy studied his face. Enough to what? The scout slid the strip he held into the inside of his coat. Enough to remember. The boy stared at him. Why that one? The scout met his eyes. Because it matters to me. The boy felt the question. Who was it? Rise in his throat, but he didn't ask. Instead, he looked back at the pile, at the way each strip seemed both heavy and fragile, like they could crumble in his hands but still outlast anyone who'd ever spoken the names. You said they vanished, the boy said. Like gone for good. The scout's voice was quiet. Like you almost were. The boy's chest tightened. What do you mean? That day in the yard, the scout said, your name could have been cut into one of these by nightfall. The boy glanced down at the strip in his hand, and for a moment he saw his name ghosted there, carved in uneven lines. He dropped it like it burned. They keep them as trophies, the boy asked. They keep them as warnings, the scout said. Every name is a reminder to someone still breathing. The boy stood, dust sticking to his knees. Then what happens when no one's left to remember? The scout looked at him for a long moment. That's when they win. The boy's gaze drifted toward the walls of the barn. The hooks hung like bare ribs, the air still except for the sound of wind pushing through the cracks. A thin line of light fell across the pile, catching on the edges of certain names like it meant to keep them visible. He crossed to where the saddle leaned against the wall, his hands closed around the horn, fingers pressing into the warm leather. He didn't even realize he'd done it until the scout's eyes flicked to the movement. Are you planning on riding it now? The scout asked. The boy shook his head. Just holding it. The scout straightened, tucking the strip deeper into his coat. Then hold it. The boy gripped tighter, as if the saddle itself was an anchor in a place that felt like it could swallow him. They left the barn without touching the rest of the pile. Outside, the light was harsher, making the dust in the air shine. The boy kept the saddle in his arms until the scout took it to strap on the horse. Even then, his hand lingered on it, like letting go might let something else slip away too. As they rode out, the barn shrank behind them, its empty hooks and hidden names swallowed by distance. The boy didn't look back. His grip stayed tight on the saddle horn, the leather warm from the sun. And for the first time, the weight of it felt like more than just a place to sit. It felt like something worth guarding, the way the scout guarded that strip of leather now tucked inside his coat. The bridge came into view just as the trail narrowed, the boards stretching across a dry gorge where the river had long since disappeared. The wood was pale, bleached from years under the sun, its edges splintered and curling. The posts leaned slightly, bound together with old iron nails that had rusted to a deep reddish brown. The boy slowed the horse, eyes running over the length of it. It doesn't look steady. It's held this long, the scout said. Does that mean it'll hold today? The scout didn't answer. He dismounted, leading the horse toward the first planks. The boy's gaze caught on the posts at the entrance. Small, neat carvings marked the wood. Short lines grouped in fives, cut deep like someone had taken their time. What are those? The boy asked. The scout glanced at them. Tally marks. For what? The scout kept walking. Depends on who was counting. The boards creaked under the horse's hooves. The boy's grip tightened on the saddle horn. He looked down through the gaps between the planks, the drop sharper than it had seemed from the trail. Dry stones lay scattered at the bottom, pale and jagged. Halfway across, the sound of hooves reached them, slow, deliberate. The scout stopped. The boy looked up and saw a rider appear at the far end of the bridge, horse dark against the bright sky. The man sat straight in the saddle, one hand resting loose on the reins, the other on his thigh. The boy's mouth went dry. "Who is it?" The scout didn't take his eyes off the rider. "Doesn't matter." The rider didn't move closer, just waited, the horse shifting slightly under him. The boy looked back the way they'd come. The trail behind was empty, but it felt no safer than what lay ahead. The scout's voice was low. "Ride first." "What?" "Go. I'll follow." The boy hesitated. "What if, don't think. Move." The horse stepped forward, the boards groaning under the weight. The sound seemed louder now, each plank protesting before holding. The boy kept his eyes on the far end, in the space just to the right of the rider where the trail continued. The rider's face was shadowed by the brim of his hat. He didn't speak, didn't shift, didn't reach for the weapon at his hip. Just watched. The boy's breath came shallow. He passed another post marked with more tallies, some cut so deep they split the wood. He wondered if each set was for a crossing, or for something else entirely. The gap between them narrowed. 20 feet. 10. The boy could see the dust on the rider's boots now, the dull glint of metal at his belt. He glanced back. The scout was close behind, leading the horse slow but steady. His eyes stayed locked on the rider. When the boy reached the far side, the rider shifted his horse just enough to clear the trail. The boy guided their mount past, the space between them no more than the width of a saddle. The rider's gaze flicked to the saddle horn under the boy's hand, then to his face. It lingered there a second too long before moving on. The boy kept riding until he was clear of the bridge. He didn't look back until he heard the boards creak again. The scout was crossing now, steps measured, the horse's weight pressing each plank into a low groan. The rider stayed in place until the scout was almost across. Then, without a word, he turned his horse and disappeared down a narrow path that curved away from the main trail. The scout reached the far side, mounted again, and urged their horse forward. The boy glanced over his shoulder. What was that? "A decision," the scout said. "His or yours?" "Both." They rode on in silence, the bridge shrinking behind them until it was just a pale line across the gorge. The boy thought about the tally marks, about the rider's eyes on the saddle, and about the way the boards had groaned under each step, like they were weighing every choice. The cabin was small, the kind built for a single winter and left to stand long after its first owner was gone. The scout pushed the door open with his shoulder, the hinges giving a low groan. Dust floated in the thin shaft of light from the single window. "Check the shutters," he said. The boy closed them tight, sliding the latch into place. The air went dim and close. The scout lit a stub of candle from his pack, setting it on the desk in the corner. The flame showed a layer of dust so thick it blurred the edges of everything. The scout pulled open the desk drawers one by one, empty except for a few broken pencils and the smell of old paper. In the bottom drawer, under a folded scrap of canvas, he found it. A ledger, bound in cracked leather, the corners worn to threads. He set it on the desk, pushing the candle closer. The boy leaned in, the faint smell of ink rising from the pages even after all this time. The handwriting was small and tight, each entry neat in its own line. "What is it?" the boy asked. "Records," the scout said. "Of what?" The scout didn't answer right away. He turned a few pages, his finger tracing the lines. The columns were labeled name, age, value. Some names were crossed through. Others had numbers beside them, amounts that meant nothing to the boy until he saw the next column marked paid. His eyes caught on the heading a few pages in. Lost stock. The list under it was longer than he expected. He scanned the names without thinking until one stopped him cold. His own. Written neat as the others, the letters sharp, no number beside it yet. He stepped back. "That's me." The scout's eyes didn't leave the page. "Yes. What's it mean?" The scout turned the book so the boy could see more clearly. "It means you were marked to be sold." The boy stared at the page, then at the others. Some names were underlined in red. Why are those marked? Those are the ones already moved, the scout said. Moved where? To whoever paid, the scout said. The boy's stomach twisted. Like cattle. The scout met his eyes. Exactly like cattle. The boy reached for the page, his fingers closing over it so hard the paper crumpled under his grip. And the sheriff keeps this? He writes it, the scout said. The boy's voice was sharp. The sheriff sells people. Yes. The boy's eyes stayed on his name, small and neat among all the others. Why didn't you burn it? Because sometimes you need proof, the scout said. The boy's grip tightened, the paper softening in his hands. You should have burned it anyway. And let them say it was just a story, the scout asked. The boy didn't answer. The candlelight flickered across the pages, making the ink seem to shift. The scout closed the book, sliding it into his coat. We keep moving. The boy's eyes narrowed. You're taking it? Yes. So it doesn't end up back on his desk. So it ends up where it hurts him, the scout said. The boy thought of the sheriff leaning against the fence that day in the yard, chewing slowly, eyes half-lidded. He thought about the easy way the man had shrugged when the landowner said it was too wild to keep. You think my name's still in his head? The boy asked. The scout's voice was quiet. Names like yours, they don't forget. The boy glanced toward the door, half expecting hoofbeats outside. What about the others in the book? They'll still be gone, the scout said. But the right hands can make it harder for him to take more. The boy rubbed his palms against his legs, as if to scrub away the feel of the paper. Feels like it's already too late. The scout blew out the candle, plunging the cabin into near darkness. It's only too late if we stop. They waited until the light through the shutters turned from gold to gray before moving again. The ledger stayed in the scout's coat, its weight pulling at the fabric. As they stepped outside, the boy glanced back into the dim cabin. The air still smelled of dust and old paper, and in his mind, the page still lay open, his name sitting neat and ready, waiting for a number. He kept close to the saddle as they rode away, the crumple of that page still in his hands long after it was gone. The night was moonless, the air sharp with the smell of char. They moved slow at first, the scout leading the horse across the edge of the field, where the grass was nothing but black stubble. Each step released a faint puff of ash. In places, the ground still gave off heat, the burn fresh enough that the boy felt it through the soles of his boots. He kept his eyes down, watching for the faint red glow where embers hid under the crust of black. The scout moved ahead, steady, his silhouette a darker shadow against the ground. How big is it? The boy asked. Big enough? The scout said without turning. The boy adjusted his grip on the saddle horn. The smell clung to him, thick and heavy, and each breath tasted of smoke. Halfway through, the wind shifted, blowing across the field instead of along it. The ash lifted in low swirls, brushing against his legs. The heat rose in uneven waves, some spots as warm as fresh coals, others cold and dead. By the time they neared the far side, the boy's shirt clung damp to his back. The land beyond was darker still, but not empty. Shapes stood between them and the trail. Horses, heads low, riders sitting still. The boy stopped. They're waiting. The scout halted beside him, eyes fixed ahead. Yes. What do we do? The scout turned to him, pulling the saddle from the horse and pressing it into the boy's arms. Run when I tell you. The boy's hands closed around the leather. Run where? Toward the gap between the first two, the scout said. They'll see me. They already do, the scout said. The boy's legs felt unsteady, a deep tremor working from his knees down. Why me? Because they want me, the scout said. Not you. The boy swallowed hard. What if they take me anyway? The scout's voice was low, certain. They won't. Not if you run when I tell you. The boy nodded, but it felt like someone else's head moving. They stood there, the field behind them still warm, the riders ahead unmoving. The horse shifted, restless without the saddle, its breath loud in the silence. The boy tried not to stare at the riders, but the stillness made it worse. He could see the faint gleam of metal where moonlight caught a rifle barrel, the slow flick of a horse's ear. How long do we wait? The boy asked. As long as it takes, the scout said. The dark pressed in around them. The burned ground held its own heat, seeping into their boots. The boy's arms ached from holding the saddle, but he didn't shift it. Feels like they're waiting for something, the boy said. They are. The scout replied, "What? For us to break first." The boy's breath felt loud in his ears. Every muscle in his legs twitched with the urge to move, but he held still. Somewhere out in the dark, a horse snorted. One of the riders shifted in his saddle, the leather creaking faintly. The scout's voice was almost a whisper. "When I move, you move." The boy tightened his grip on the saddle horn, feeling the smooth curve press into his palm. "And if I fall, you won't," the scout said. The boy looked at him then. The set of his jaw, the steady way his eyes stayed on the gap ahead, it made him believe it for just a moment. The waiting stretched on, long enough that the boy started to think maybe nothing would happen at all. His legs burned, but he locked his knees to keep them from giving way. Then the scout's hand brushed his shoulder. "Now." The boy ran. The saddle jolted in his arms with every step, the leather slick against his shirt. The ground changed under his feet, from warm ash to hard packed dirt. A shout went up from one of the riders, but he didn't turn his head. The gap between the first two horses opened in front of him, and he drove toward it, breath tearing in his throat. He passed between them in a rush of hooves and the sharp scent of sweat. One horse sidestepped, but its rider didn't block him. Behind him, hooves thundered, but not after him. The sound angled away toward where the scout had been. The boy didn't look back. He kept running until the ground sloped down, the dark closing behind him like a curtain. Only then did he stop, chest heaving, the saddle still clutched tight in his arms. The night was silent again, but it wasn't the kind of silence that felt safe. The shout came sharp through the dark, cutting through the night air like a snapped rope. The boy ran. The saddle banged hard against his hip with every step, throwing him off balance, but he didn't stop. Hooves pounded behind him, heavy and closing fast. He kept his eyes forward, the ground rushing under his boots, but the noise swelled until it filled everything, breath, heart, the space between thoughts. A shot split the air. The crack was close, too close. He threw himself sideways, hitting the dirt and rolling into the brush. Twigs tore at his clothes, caught in his hair. He held the saddle tight against his chest, heart hammering, the smell of leather sharp in his nose. Through the tangle of branches he saw them. The scout stood in the open, then dropped to one knee. The horse he'd been holding bolted, the reins flapping loose. Another shot came, and the scout staggered but stayed upright. The boy's chest seized. He wanted to yell, to move, but his body locked tight. Then the scout turned his head, found him in the shadows, and smiled. Not wide, just enough for the boy to see it, enough to cut through the panic. One of the riders closed in, circling. The scout rose to his feet, slow but steady, and stepped toward him. The night was a tangle of shapes and noise, hooves striking dirt, leather creaking, breath in sharp bursts. Another gunshot. This one sent the scout back a step, then down to one knee again. His hand went to the ground, steadying himself. The boy's breath came fast, ragged. He shifted, pushing the saddle out ahead of him, crawling low through the brush. The loose horse stood just beyond the tangle, its head high, ears flicking at the chaos. He broke from the cover, running the last steps. The horse shied, but didn't bolt. The boy grabbed the reins, swung the saddle up awkwardly, fumbling with the cinch. His fingers slipped, but he yanked it tight enough to hold. Another shout rang out, sharp, angry. The boy didn't look toward it. He put one foot in the stirrup and hauled himself up. The saddle felt different now, not just weight, but anchor. His hands found the reins. His knees pressed into the horse's sides. He glanced back once. The scout was on the ground now, one hand braced in the dirt, still looking at him. The smile was still there, faint but certain. It wasn't a goodbye. Not exactly. It was permission. The boy kicked the horse forward. The animal leapt into a gallop, the ground blurring under them. The wind tore at his hair, stung his eyes. He kept low, the saddle horn solid under his grip. The night opened around him, the noise of the chase fading behind. The land ahead was dark and empty, but it was his to cross now. Every hoofbeat carried him farther, each one harder to name. Fear, relief, the pull of something bigger than either. He didn't know how far he'd gone when the sounds behind him faded entirely. The air was cold in his lungs, the saddle warm under him from his own body heat. He slowed only when the horse's breathing turned heavy, steam rising from its flanks in the cool night. They came to a low rise, the land stretching black and wide beyond. The boy pulled the reins, bringing the horse to a stop. The silence pressed in, deep and absolute. He sat there, the saddle finally his. Not because it had been given, not because it had been earned by some measure he understood, but because it was what he carried now. He looked back once toward the place where the night had broken apart, where the scout had stood, where the shot had cracked, where the smile had cut through everything. Nothing moved there now, only the darkness settling again over the burned ground. He turned forward, heels nudging the horse into a steady walk. The weight on his hips and legs wasn't just leather and metal. It was named on strips of hide, a ledger in a coat pocket, a mark burned into a tree. It was the sound of hoofbeats on an old bridge and the smell of ash in his hair. The wind rose, carrying the faintest trace of smoke from somewhere far off. He didn't flinch. The saddle creaked under him, the rhythm of the horse steady. The open land waited ahead, empty and endless. He rode toward it, carrying more than he could name, but carrying it all the same.